Good morning, Wiggle here. Got my other head back. It took like 8 thousandths off it. Didn't need much. So I am now cleaning up the gasket surfaces. Getting ready to install this head. I went and got my torque wrench yesterday, so I'm ready to go with that. So this one is cleaned up, if you can see that. This one is not. I have sprayed brake cleaner. So what I'm doing is using as high RPM as I can. Got this, and it's 80 grit. It's the only one I could find. I looked all over the place. So I'm using a high RPM and very little pressure, if any, just trying to clean it up a little bit. So it's got some pitting and so forth. So I'm pretty sure I'm not going to hurt it with this thing. So I'm just going to clean up my surfaces a little bit. So I hit it with this lightly. And then I do by hand with this. Get these at the paint department. So I'm doing my warm-up on the exhaust and intake manifold part. So before I try to do the interior of where the head is going to sit, because it definitely needs to be cleaned up on the block. And I'm also taking this and just hitting it a little bit to just get any little shavings out, any tiny little tool marks. Just doing a little bit. I don't think it's hurting it. I think it's smoothing it out and cleaning it just a little bit. I haven't done that's the, well, no, this is the one I did do. Got garbage on it now. Just moving it around. So I'll definitely spray it with brake cleaner before I install it. Get all that grease off of there so it'll be ready. See, I cleaned the valves on that one. That one I didn't. It's got cook on it, so I just clean the valve a little bit and then also just sand the head. It got dirty. It wasn't dirty like that until I'm rolling it around. So anyway, I'm going to finish cleaning these gaskets areas. I'll go clean the block. Anyway, there is the intake side cleaned up. So here's the other side. And when I hold it right, see these marks? It's from the vibration from where the parts were bolted together, but everything's shaking. And it's worn little grooves in the face. They're not very deep. So I've got down to the old paint. You can see, oh, dirt off it. So I've got down to the old paint and I've kind of polished a little bit. Nothing serious. I'm thinking I'm not going to use a tool on the head or on the block. I think I'm just going to use these and do it by hand just in case. Because I can see slight little polish marks. I don't want to do any of that to the head. So I want it to be just completely smooth. So I'm going to take this over there and scrub on that head. So here's my top of my 4-cylinder diesel. And I got these paper towels down in there to keep the grit out of my cylinders. And I'm just using this to scrape off the oil and the grit and this carbon and this whatever. Just scraping all the old stuff off. Nice clean surface, and then I'm going to clean it. I'll use a little brake cleaner on it to get the grease off, and then I'll start cleaning it with a little pad. So I'm going to finish scraping it with this, and then I'm going to wipe it down with brake cleaner, and then I'll show you what I'm doing. Before I go too far, I want you to see around that cylinder sleeve. This is where the head gasket blew. See how it pushed out over time? And you can see where it was leaking water into the exhaust. Or maybe that's an exhaust passage. No, that's not an exhaust passage. That's a water passage. Yeah. Anyway, you can see where it would be pushing air from the compression into the water. That's why my radiator was getting positive pressure from the engine, blowing the water out of the radiator. And it's already started to rust from sitting out like this. So I'm going to clean all the grease off, and then I'm going to polish that rust out. Clean all this carbon off of here. That head gasket gonna be right. You can see the outline of it. You want to make sure that that's sealed now. So we're gonna have to clean that up really well. So this side is done. I started getting down to the old paint and tried to just make the metal look as even as I could around. And I also try to make sure to hold my pad as flat. I don't want to gouge into anything, so I'm holding my pad as flat as possible and not trying to focus on one area too much. try to do all the same amount of pressure and the same amount of movement to just kind of polishing away the dirt and the carbon and just making sure it's nice and clean and even looking. Get all the grease out of there. This side hasn't been done yet over here. So we'll see if it looks any different here in a minute. Alright, so the worst part was where the gasket had blown out. And I held it flat and I tried to even it out as much as I could. And I mean, you don't really feel any of that with your fingernail. So it'd be less than 1,000 probably. I could feel that right there. But that's where the cylinder sleeve is. So I think the head's going to push down on this. I'm not sure if that's going to hurt me or not. Because it looks, you'd have to pull these sleeves out to resurface. It would be a major deal to redo this head. Now, I noticed there's a little hole in a notch in the side of that piston. See that? I don't know what that's all about. That kind of concerns me, but I'm not really blowing oil, so maybe we're losing some compression on that one. We shall see. I'm not sure. The other pistons don't share that. So I'm just going to put it back together and see how it goes, because it was running. I mean, this head gasket was the main problem. I don't know. I don't want to do a whole rebuild, I'll tell you that. This is about as clean as I'm going to get it. I'm not going to use any power tools on it. I'm going to get an air blower out here and blow all this grit out of the pistons and start putting it back together. That's where we're at now. I'll get it blown out and start putting the head gaskets. I'm not putting any sealant or anything on the head gasket. I'm just going to stick it right on there, because the new ones, they have some kind of sealant in them. I'm not sure if putting anything in there is going to help at all. So I'm just going to assemble it without. Then I'll try to figure out how to put it all back together. Okay, this is the engine block. These are cylinders. So how many cylinders are there? 4. These are pistons inside here. That's the part that goes up and down inside the engine. So for now, you just need to know that. So this is a, what is this?
Engine block.
Yes. What is this?
Cylinder.
The cylinder, and then this thing inside the cylinder is the
Piston.
Okay, so that is, and look right here, you can see this wear. This is where the problem happened with why the engine broke. You see that wear? That's where the head gasket pushed out. There's one head that goes on here and one head that goes on here. This has 2 heads on it and they're separate. That's where, and I'll show you over there. So if you want to see the worn out part, well, you can get up on the left. Okay, so what we're looking at is an internal combustion engine. What do you think that means?
Combustion happens.
Correct. What is an engine?
Not sure the exact definition, but I know that in the car, it usually involves gas, air mixture that spark plug ignites and causes a miniature explosion that causes the piston to go back and forth.
But an engine, more just generically, you're right about all that. An engine is basically just something that makes power to turn something or to move something. It generally makes something turn.
Yeah.
So like the engine in your car will eventually turn the wheels. So an engine, so you have an internal combustion engine, and what we just looked at, the cylinders, that's where the internal explosion happens. And what happens when something explodes?
It creates, it expands out.
Expanding force, right?
Yeah.
So the expanding force is what the cylinder, when it explodes, it pushes down on that cylinder, and that cylinder moves, and that there's parts of that takes the movement and turns it into power, into torque. Yes, that's a more complicated. This top part of the cylinder is what we're dealing with. These heads are part of the engine, but they're separate pieces, and they sit down on top of the cylinders. And this right here is where the cylinders, remember what the top of that head looked like? The cylinder, the block looked like? Mm-hmm. And I had shown you where it was worn out. That is the worn out part. This piece of metal sits on top of that piece of metal, and all that pressure, and that pressure had pushed this ring out a little bit, and it finally blew it out. That's what it means when you blow a head gasket. This is a head gasket, this is a head, and it got
And this just normally does not come off. It's supposed to
yeah,
stay
I can go.
of it.
I'll get a new one. I should have brought a new one out, but I didn't. So what do you need to have an explosion?
Oxygen, gas.
A spark, right?
Spark. And what else? Well, oxygen, air. Oxygen, yes. And then if you're inside of an enclosed thing and you want to have another explosion, what do you have to do?
You have to
get rid of the old gas. So
Piston suction.
So this is what the cylinder head does is it brings fuel and air into the cylinder and then seals it off and then somehow makes it explode and then it lets the gas out. So these are valves and they open and close. They have big springs. There's parts that push up and down on them.
Is this the bottom of it?
This is the top. This is the bottom. This is the part that
Okay.
goes against the, so these bigger valves that open and close, that lets in the air. They're bigger because it's naturally aspirated, which means it just pulls air straight in just like normal. There's no help. The air is just sucked into the engine and there's no, you can have fans and stuff that push the air in. That's what a turbo is, or that's what a supercharger is. It forces the air in. That's why it makes them go faster. But this is just a natural engine and the air is just coming in. So the valves that let the air in are a little bit bigger. And since it's under pressure, when the exhaust comes out, the exhaust valves, which open, are smaller. So you have a bigger and smaller valve. And these are all open and closed at the right time because those pistons are moving. Those 4 pistons move at in a different sequence. They're not all up or down at one time. They go like this. They kind of, and that's what, and like, so when, that'll help the exhaust on one's popping off and pushing the air out of the other one. It's all timed. Those cylinders are in a certain sequence. And the same for the valves. The valves open and close in a certain sequence. These parts need to be flat because there's a lot of pressure and the gaskets are where the parts meet.
And that prevents it from striking, or what is it?
This just seals it. This keeps all that stuff from blowing out. Exhaust. You want it to stay inside the cylinder where it's supposed to. That way when it explodes. Now the interesting thing about a diesel as opposed to a gas engine, there's a little nozzle here. You can see where the air comes in. You can see where the exhaust comes out. And then there's these little valves that stick, or the little injectors that stick in here. And they squirt fuel in. They squirt diesel. But a diesel doesn't have spark plugs. A regular car has a spark plug, and at the right time it fires and it makes the explosion. A diesel, guess what the spark is on a diesel?
The pressure?
Yes.
Air pressure?
Yes, it's 22 to 1, usually pretty close to that. So there's 22 parts of air, and then it's squished down to 1 part, and when it gets squished down, the friction from the air makes it explode. So there's no spark plug.
Ignites the diesel.
Yes, it's just friction from the compression. That diesels last a lot longer than regular engines, or gas engines. So anyway, any questions?
Okay, so you said exhaust, so that makes me think. Exhaust as in like a gaseous vapor is what comes out of this?
Like when you're driving behind somebody and their car's smoking?
Yeah, that's the exhaust.
Or,
So you were saying, I thought you said that the gas came out this way, but it's the exhaust, the fuel.
Fuel comes in
is
this one.
In here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
There's your cylinder.
So the diesel one just was carbureted.
You're correct. You're correct. Now, if you want to look at this, see how these are bigger and these are the intake. You can guess which side the intake. You can look in here in these ports or these little tunnels, like little caves, and you can see that this one will go to the outside because you can look down in there and see. So this is where the intake. This is the intake manifold. The part that bolts on there is the intake manifold, and the part that bolts on the other side is the exhaust manifold. So the air is coming in to the cylinders this way and going out that way.
And you only have one spot in the middle. You don't have a matching on the other side.
Yeah, these ports will go to the exhaust.
Air.
When I say it backwards, these are the exhaust ports. The outside ones are the exhaust
That's
ports.
what you said.
Okay, this is.
You did say it backwards.
I did say it backwards, and these are the intake ports. So yeah, I said it backwards, but so the air's coming in one side, and the exhaust gas is coming out the other, and the fuel is just getting squirted in. There's a little hole right here. The little injectors go right in there. I can show you that.
Yeah.
So there are other parts to the engine that push the valves open and close. That's called the cam and the lifters and the push rods. There's little arms that push, and it's all timed together. It's hooked together with a chain, timing chain, and it keeps the cam turning, and the cam that's inside. We don't see any of that. And then there's the crankshaft, which has rods connected to the pistons, and as it turns, all those pieces just move up and down.
What happens if something's mistiming?
Then it won't be firing right. It'll be sputtering, might be igniting at the wrong time and coming out on the exhaust and there's no power. Basically, timing is more for internal combustion. Well, I guess it is for these two because these got to open at the right time. But diesels are a lot less picky. They just need to get some gas in there and then they need to close these valves.
Pressure needs to be
Yeah,
up.
yes, they're just less picky because they don't have a spark plug. Because you also have to have the spark happening at the right time, but with the diesel, the spark automatically happens just from the pressure. So it's diesels. That's why diesels last 1,000,000 miles and regular gas engines don't.
What causes the diesel to go in there? Is it like a steady flow of diesel that just flows, or does
Let me grab an injector. So that's what a good head gasket would look like.
Yeah.
And the injector goes right in this little right here.
Okay.
And it goes all the way down through and it comes right out right there. That little nozzle points out, and it's like just a squirt gun. It just squirts the diesel right in there.
And it does it all on its own, or like
Yeah, it's pretty much a constant.
like a flow.
Yes.
Okay.
Because I don't see where it would be on this. It's like all mechanical. There's nothing to control it. It's just a fuel pump, and it just so it's always
Feeding it.
yeah.
As
And
long as it's
the
running.
throttle when you open it up, that's just like a gate that lets more air in. So it just as you open it, more air flows in, and it just runs faster and faster. And then you let off the throttle, and it chokes the air back, and it's just less air. So it's all just the airflow.
Meeting up with the.
Yeah, the airflow just controls everything. I'm not sure how the fuel is metered. It's not timed or anything, as far as I know. It's all just just injected constantly, or maybe it's I don't know. I don't understand it, to be honest, because the carburetor is on a regular car. That's what controls the air and fuel mixture. The air and fuel mixture is only controlled by the injector on a diesel, and then the compression. So I'm learning.
That's a good question.
Yeah, good question. I just got to put these things back on, and you got to bolt them back on just right so it all stays flat and tight. You got to compress everything just right. That way there's no leaks. Because there's another aspect to this head. There's water.
And this is how much? This is the thing that came in that box.
Yes, $150 for those. Yeah. There's also water passages, so the water is pumped through here to keep it cool.
Oh, okay.
So there's water coming through the heads, and there's oil.
To keep it lubricated.
Yes, there's oil coming to the top
Of this
to
thing.
keep all that stuff. There's a lot of moving parts. So this is where your valve cover, where you a lot of times see the engines, that little cover that goes over this, it has a seal. This all gets lubricated. So there's oil getting pumped up and then draining back down. So there's oil passages in the head, water passages, air passages, exhaust passages, and fuel passages. All of that's happening in the head. So it's a
Do you need filters for all that stuff?
yeah, but not here.
Yeah.
This is all inside the engine. So
Yeah. Okay.
so there is oil inside of this part. Well, actually in the bottom. There's no, in the combustion chamber, there's very little oil because you would be burning oil. Most of the oil is in the underside, in the crank part up here. Any other questions? I just thought you guys should see this while I have it apart.
Do these actually come out?
Yes, you could take them apart. You have to squish them, and there's little retainers.
And then I'll.
You have to squish them together, pull the thing out, and then they'll pop off. And they're under a lot of pressure.
So
when
these are called.
these are valve springs and valves. This is the other side of that,
Right.
and they stay shut until something pushes them open.
And the hole is called the cylinder, or
Yes,
the
the
cup
hole.
thing.
The hole is the cylinder, and the pistons are in the cylinder. And it's too much to explain right now, but the whole bottom part of the engine is something different, and I could show you pictures. But this is the top part. So the heads are what make everything work. They're very important. So.
Well, it is kind of cool to know what it means to blow a head gasket.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And
Say again?
Everything's basically running so what the head needs.
well, the head helps the cylinder run. The cylinder needs what the cylinder either needs air, or it needs exhaust, or it needs compression, or it needs
So
fire.
is this like the brain of the?
No, not really, not really.
Okay.
It's just
Really do any thinking. It's like the engine.
it's all mechanical. But now on the new computer stuff, even the new diesels is a lot more computer controlled. This is all just
Mechanical.
very basic stuff here.
That's
It's
cool.
1977 or whatever.
That's cool
So,
though.
and you can crack your heads, which if you crack your heads, then water's going where oil should be or where combustion should be. Exhaust is getting, things go where they're not supposed to go when you crack your head. Or when you blow a head gasket, you can also have.
Now this looks like a chip. It's so close.
Yeah,
Is
there's
that a problem?
these are rough. The casting, you can see it's just rough.
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter right here that it's
No, because
a little chipped.
the
The fuel injector.
yeah the
Okay,
injector
okay.
comes out. So I was surprised how rough these actually looked. You could probably like polish them and it'll help with your efficiency, but I'm
So
not.
what did you have to do when you had it repaired? What was it?
Okay,
you
this
doing
was
to
all
repair?
rough and pitted. This
Top part.
yeah,
so you, like, sand it down,
so yeah, he used a big metal
Scrape it.
disc, and it just, you could see the
grooves. Yeah.
teeth just smoothed it out. It was pitted. When it's pitted, your head won't seal down right. You want the metal on each side of this to be really smooth, so when you
So
touch.
you didn't have to do it to the part that's already attached to the machine.
No, I sanded it down by hand, just cleaned it up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. These old diesels, you don't want to, unless you're rebuilding them all the way. So what he was telling me is if we would have put new valves in there and increased their efficiency, because they're a little leaky, because they're old. But if we would have fixed it too much, it'd blow out your seal, blow out your piston ring. You don't want to get too much new compression. We're improving the compression a lot now with doing this.
Just doing that.
Yes, and fixing all the leaks because where it had problems. So, but you don't want to. If you do the valves, then you have all extra compression and it's pushing harder on all the other old parts on the bottom part of the engine.
So it's like a chain. We need to replace all the links so that way they can all have the same metal.
That's a good analogy. I can show you what it looks like after I put it back together. So valves, and there's up through these holes, there's things called push rods. It's just basically a metal stick, metal rod, and there's these rocker arms. So the rocker arm sits on that and it just pushes it open at the right time. But all of that's disassembled right now.
So is there a left and a right? Like, is it?
Yes.
Does it matter
Yes.
which one goes
Yes.
on which?
They're actually identical, but there's a
A way to match it up.
plumbing part.
Okay.
Oh no, the plumbing part's here. This plumbing part.
Determines which one.
Yes. So you
side
see
it's
1,
on.
2, 3, 4. All the other ones got a plug, and that one piece.
Oh, okay.
So these are identical.
Okay.
Any more questions? Well, here we are. I blew all the shavings out of the ports from the machine shop. I cleaned the surface of the head one last time with brake cleaner. Same for the block here. I cleaned that side, and I've set the gasket down. I did use compressed air to make sure all my grit was out of the inside of the cylinders, and then I wiped the inside of the cylinders with a little straight 30 weight oil just so the inside of the cylinder will be lubricated at startup. And you have to be careful not to get it up on your head surface when you're putting that lube on there, so because then you don't want to contaminate your head gasket with. So but anyway, it's pre-lubed, cleaned, ready to go, degreased, and I'm going to set this sucker on there and show you what I'm going to do from there. Alright, I got the head set down on there. I put my first 2 bolts in but didn't tighten them at all. That's just to guide them, get them in place and make sure they're threading in. I'll take those back out in a minute. Now what I'm going to do is I put these in. I'm going to just dip them in straight 30 weight oil. Put them in. That way I've lubricated. I'm going to clean it. I cleaned them already, but I'm going to clean it a little better. Missed that spot. I'm going to clean it, dip it in fresh oil, and then put it down in there. And then I'll show you from there. Pink Floyd on the radio, got both heads set on, got all the bolts in, and I just barely tighten them with my little ratchet that I have, 3/8 ratchet. And you can see that the head gasket is kind of even. You can kind of see where it's, especially on the back, there's some little tabs. And you can see that right here. You can see that. There's some little tabs, and you can see that the head gasket's all seated properly. All the bolts are in. So it's ready, man. So I'm gonna get my brand new Harbor Freight torque wrench and we'll give her a spin. See how it goes. Well, guess what? It's amateur hour here on the homestead. Shade tree mechanic. The specs call for these heads, these old diesel, high pressure, heavy duty heads, industrial machine here. you tighten your head bolts in sequence. You start in the middle and then you work your way out in a circular pattern, and you do it in 3 series. You do it at 70 pounds of torque, 140 pounds of torque, and then finally 210 pounds of torque. Well, think about 210 pounds of torque. That's a lot of torque. That's putting the old whoop-a-woo on there. This torque wrench, my $24.99 special, lovely thing, goes to $150. So I have got the first 2 sequences done, but I cannot put the final torque on these heads until I have a better torque wrench. And I didn't realize this, or I would have bought a better torque wrench. And I'm yanking pretty hard to get it at 140. I'm putting a little bit of muscle on it. I can only imagine what 210 is going to be like. You're going to need a lot bigger breaker bar, or a lot bigger torque wrench. You're going to need some more handle on that baby. Sheesh. So now I'm at a standstill. But I do have the heads on, and I could go ahead and start putting everything else together, but I'm going to just go ahead and knock it off. I'm going to quit until I find a torque wrench. Joy, joy. A lot of sun coming in. You always see that old crack there. See that little silver gasket right there. Below that water passage. That's how you know you got your head gaskets on right. You better hope you didn't mess that up by now. But anyway, when you first put it on, be sure to check, make sure your gasket seated right. This particular gasket seats around the cylinder sleeves, so it's a little bit easier because it doesn't really let it slide around quite so much. Man, that's a beautiful thing. Hopefully everything's in good order, but I gotta go find that torque wrench. But I just want to show you that. That makes me happy. Get it put back together. At least I won't get any debris down in my cylinders now.